Hi, my name is Ashik Ram, and today I'm joined by Abdul Koker, and we are the co-hosts of the podcast The Second Curve. And this podcast focuses on the second curve of learning that people often go through in their career, along with the stories and experiences that shaped who they are today. Our goal is to take these stories and share them, along with uncovering what the next big thing will be in their industry.
Right, so here today we're joined by Sastry. If you could quickly introduce yourself, to everybody watching who's unfamiliar, and maybe a quick one, two sentence of what you do.
Sure. My name is Sastry Kompella. I am currently the CEO of a small company called Nexepta, which is in Gaithersburg, Maryland. Before joining Nexepta, before co-founding Nexepta along with a couple of few colleagues of mine, I was at the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory, where I was a section head for the Wireless Networks Research Section. I ran the section 11 out of 16 years that I've been at NRL. And before that, I did my PhD in computer engineering at Virginia Tech, 2003 to 2006. And my area of interest is communications, wireless communications and networking. That has been what I've been doing for the past 20 odd years. It's a great area to be in. And I'm really happy to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah. So you talked about how you've been into wireless communications for a very long time. So we wanted to ask what originally pulled you toward like computer engineering and communications. Like, what was the point where you were like, oh, I want to go to wireless communication.
So this is when I was a teenager, a long time ago, I suppose. Uh, I had this interesting experience. My dad, on one of his overseas trips, I was in obviously growing up in India. My dad had brought a TI calculator for me and gave it to me. I was in my seventh grade at the time. I didn't know what Texas Instruments was at that time. Then I kind of started asking around and learning a little bit about the company. Up until then, most of the calculators we would find in India were all Casio, Japanese calculators. So TI was a new company and learned quickly that it was based in the US. And digging a little bit more, learned their activities related to developing a lot of signal processing chipsets and things like that. That led to learning a little bit about wireless and the impact of that in general. And over time, I had this opportunity in my undergrad to decide on which major I wanted to go into. So I was curious about communications. So I ended up joining electronics and communications as my undergrad major. One of the first things that we were shown, or one of the first courses that we had was related to this communication systems book by Simon Haken, which is he's a very well known gentleman. I didn't know him at that time. Obviously, I just happened to read the book. Later on in my life, I actually happened to meet him, so I was pretty happy about that. So in that book, you start about communication systems, understanding modulations, understanding signal processing, laying foundations for wireless communications. So that was very interesting to me, and that kind of laid the foundations of my future activity. So when you think about communications, over time you realize that it is a fundamental thing to everything that we do every day, right? So communicating, relaying information kind of comes naturally to us. So, if you go back in history all the way from, this is interesting. Recently, as part of IEEE, I actually gave a talk on origins of communications. So, one of the first things you would think about when it comes to communication, wireless communications, is smoke signals, which were invented long, long time ago as the first one bit kind of information that was conveyed. Later on, a lot more information was conveyed through that. So when you think about all of this, gives you a perspective of how communications is pretty important for our daily life. And then when you add the concept of obviously we learn maths, we learn physics, we learn chemistry, right? So when you combine math and physics, you kind of get to the communications kind of a landscape. So that actually is another really something that I learned through my school activity and all that. I was able to take whatever I learned from math, apply it into comms, and that kind of laid the foundation for all the stuff that I did.
Yeah, and how would you say the field itself has progressed from when you first got into it to like where it is now?
The field, this is an interesting field. In some sense, there are open problems that are still open, but in some sense, things have progressed as well. One example of how things have progressed is if you look at the bandwidths or the data rates that you are able to communicate, right? Um, as a simple example, look at cellular communications, right? You guys are used to 4G and now 5G, right? But this obviously started at 1G. So if you remember, 1G was analog communications, so it was not even digital. And then 2G is when the first digital communications from a cellular standpoint came into existence, right? Then continue that with 3G, 4G. Every time there is a change in the generation, typically it's an order of like 10 years. The speeds go up tremendously. In fact, I have slides that talk about exactly what these speeds were. But if you recall, 2G, 3G, they were in the order of kilobits per second. And in 4G, it went up to megabits per second. Now in 5G, it's supposed to touch a gigabit per second connectivity from your cell phone itself. Sometimes, I mean, most of the time you don't see those speeds, but that is that is definitely something that has changed, right? But the area that I'm interested in, the area that I work in, is communications for the military, tactical communications. There are some things that haven't caught up yet, in the sense that, for one main reason, which is if you look at cellular communications, it has infrastructure, right? You have base stations, you have uh, that are spread across in a landscape. They are connected together, and they're connected by fiber, so they can pass huge amounts of information between them. And you have the cell phones that connect to the base station, and you have a way of pushing data from a one hop, right, from your cell phone to your base station. And then from there, it just gets onto to the internet or to the core network, which is fast, which is very high speed. Whereas in the military communications, you don't have that kind of an infrastructure. Especially, imagine you're a group of soldiers that are deployed in an area. This is actually a little reminiscent of some rural areas as well, where you don't have this kind of cellular connectivity, right? Like your cell phone dies when you're on a highway, uh, not near any city, for example. Then you don't have any connectivity. So imagine soldiers having to operate in an environment like that. They use this mechanism called ad hoc communications or ad hoc networking. The bandwidths there, this data rates are still fairly low. On top of it, imagine a scenario where you're in the presence of an adversary that is trying to degrade your communications, right? So that kind of a scenario is where the data rates are not very high. There is a lot of dynamism. There is a lot of degradability, things like that. So those are the kind of problems that I study. Those are much harder in some sense than commercial kind of problem spaces. So in that sense, uh, things that change, usually you want to get increased bandwidths, increased data rates, right? That is one thing. But things that still are open problems are, impact of the channel. The channel itself is a very random thing. You have to understand what it is. People have obviously made a lot of strides in terms of understanding and modeling the channels, but the real world is a lot more complicated than that. So there are still a lot of open problems. And if you want to sum up one question, one fundamental question that is still an open question, is that from a point-to-point communications perspective, meaning single transmitter to a single receiver, we understand everything about that problem. What is the maximum achievable data rate? What is the capacity? Is the phrase that we use. What is the capacity of that link? We understand everything about it thanks to work by Claude Shannon, who's a giant in the area of communications and information theory. But to answer the same question in the presence of in the form of a network where you have multiple nodes communicating together, that is still an open problem, and people have spent a long time, like 50 years, and still it is still an open.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. We talk about like these different problems that are now like so prevalent right now, and like how like many people have tried to like fix them. But you also talked about like when you were like looking at your profile, you said you worked in like PhD. So you after you worked for like some period of time, like what motivated you to start like your PhD and do like research and all of that?
That's an interesting question. So uh, your parents, I'm kind of probably at that age now. I'm probably giving away my age, but we're in some sense, I'm sure, a similar story of like coming from India, to US as a student, right? That was sort of my story. Came to US in 1996 to do a master's after my undergrad. I completed my master's in 98. My thesis advisor at the time wanted me to continue to get my PhD. I was very interested in that, but I was also interested in making some money, right? Like becoming independent a little bit. So I thought I will do that first, and but I another side to it is also wanted to get some work experience. I wanted to understand because until then I've never really worked anywhere, so I wanted to get some practical perspective as well. So I got a campus placement from Texas Tech that I was doing my master's at to a company called Simtex, which is a small startup at that time. Uh, so I went. This company was a test system development company, meaning that we were at the time creating test systems for any device under test. The ones that I worked on at that time, this was 1998. If you remember Y2K, I'm sure your parents would remember that a lot more than you. So that was also the time when telecommunications bandwidths were increasing. Internet was just coming into the fore, and people needed mechanisms to improve data communications, increase throughputs in wired communications as well. So Sonnet was the protocol that the telecom companies were using, optical communications. So my area in that company was to build test systems to test optical switches. So I did a lot of work in that for the first couple of years. It was great. I was learning a lot of things, but over time it kind of became narrow and monotonous. So I was looking for a way out in some sense, and serendipitously, my brother, who was doing his PhD at UC San Diego at that time, sent me a note where Virginia Tech had this opening. They were looking for PhD, folks who were interested in doing a PhD with a fellowship from NSF. That was a great opportunity, so I applied and I was selected. So that is how I ended up at Virginia Tech to do my PhD.
Yeah, and I think that's like a really great, I don't think we've ever had someone like working like when the people we've interviewed, we haven't had like this type of like working communication stuff. So that's also very interesting. And so now you work at Next Step. So like, how has your focus evolved from working like the PhD and working the job before? What are you working on now specifically in Next Step?
Yeah, so after my PhD, my PhD advisor actually was working with somebody at NRL, Naval Research Laboratory. So when I was about to complete my PhD, he mentioned maybe you should go talk to him. And I did. So they asked me to give a talk. I went to NRL. I drove up there from Blacksburg, gave a talk, and by that evening I had a job at NRL. So I ended up immediately after my PhD, I started at the Naval Research Laboratory as a research scientist. This was in 2006. And that is when I started looking at problems that are military oriented, as I mentioned earlier: ad hoc networks, wireless communications, disadvantaged users, how to apply information theory to these special niche of problem spaces. And my PhD thesis was on video, optimizing video over wireless communications. So, over wireless networks, actually. So if you have a video source, just like we're communicating right now, imagine that in a setting, in an ad hoc network setting where you've got a source and a destination and multiple nodes in between. Imagine that you can have multiple paths from the source to the destination. And the problem that we were looking at was optimizing the amount of information that you would want to push across each of the paths so that no one path gets overwhelmed, and also the information gets received at the destination, that you can aggregate all the video data and then decode it and then present it in the form of a streaming video, right? So that was the problem space that I was looking at. It was a very important problem space that was being looked at by a lot of companies actually at that time. HP labs, a lot of universities. So it was a very interesting problem space at the time. If you get to the point where you're interested in this area, there is this theory called rate distortion theory that we applied, where the idea is that whenever you do encoding like MP3, MP4, which probably the current system uses, or H. 263.264 that comes out of the European standards. Anytime you do encoding, you're trying to basically come up with a mechanism where you're taking the video and then converting it into something that can be transmittable, right? So MP4 has MPEG-4 has like this iframes, P frames, things like that. The structure where for every few iframes you get a new P frame, which does anchoring the video, and then so this is a series of frames, and then when you transmit or when you display a few frames per second, that is how you reconstruct the video at the destination. So there is a rate that you are encoding your video at, and the higher the rate, the better the quality. But the higher the rate, the congestion in the network is also increasing, right? Because you're putting more data into the network, which means that the quality will get degraded because some of the nodes in the middle may not be able to push all the data to the destination. So they'll start to drop packets. When that happens, your quality will suffer. So finding the optimal rate that the network can support, it was an interesting problem at that time. It is still an interesting problem, but it is instantiated into more of a resource allocation problem now, not just for video, but now it is video, data, elastic, inelastic data, all sorts of things. So there is a class of work called resource allocation optimization that is a very prevalent, still very important area of networking and operations research. So that is the area that I was concentrating on while I was at NRL. But I was also, because it is a naval area, research lab, we were looking at more Navy related problems. In 2022, I came out of NRL and, as I mentioned, co-founded Nexepta with a few colleagues who were my friends, my colleagues who were always on the industry side. So they didn't have a specific affiliation with the service lab like I did. But once I got out of NRL, my horizon has expanded. Now I can, when I look at Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, OUSD, Office of Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. I look at commercial problems. So now my scope has expanded significantly. That is one of the changes that happened in the last 4 years. But the class of problems, there is one other thing, AI. In the last few years, the prevalence of AI has actually also changed the landscape significantly, where now instead of using classic optimization frameworks, if you have a lot of data, you can use innovative AI mechanisms to actually make sense of the data instead of modeling that as an optimization problem. So in that sense, that has also changed a little.
And yeah, so I don't know if you got to the point. If you were to like, let's say like someone doesn't know anything about your company, doesn't know anything about communications, how would you describe that in like 1 to 2 sentences?
If that would be a little hard, but let me try. So we are a R&D company, a small business that work in the area in the cross section of communications, networking, AIML, and cybersecurity. And wireless is part of this landscape, but it is not the whole thing. Uh, we are very interested in looking at problems related to wireless communications, wireless networking. Similarly, we apply a lot of novel AIML techniques along with domain knowledge to solve critical problems in this landscape. And similarly, we are very interested in the nexus of communications and cybersecurity as well. So there is a very interesting problem space that is evolving in that area. So far, there have been two separate silos, but we are actually one of the few entities that are looking at the intersection of these two areas as well.
Right. So the thing I'm interested about here is because a lot of the intersections of the fields you mentioned are quite prevalent, right? Like cybersecurity and AIML, they're becoming more and more important by the day. My question is when you're looking at possible people to hire or just in general, like in the market, um, what are two separate things, right? What are some things that you specifically look for, and what are some things that people seem to be lacking nowadays?
Okay, based on the landscape that I explained, what we are looking at, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're interested in, and we actually have hired people. Okay, the most obvious is communications, right? Communications networking folks. So if you look at Virginia Tech as an example, there are about 15 to 20 faculty that are mostly working in the area of communications and networking. So if you if you work with them or if you've taken courses from them, definitely that is a good uh, landscape of where we can get talent from. Being a research and development company, our focus is usually in hiring PhDs. It is a little hard for us to hire engineers. But having said that, we hire PhDs from the perspective of actually, developing problem spaces, right? Working on solving the hard problem space. From a theoretical side, then maybe a little bit bringing that onto the practical implementation, stuff like that. Once that happens, we also need engineers, obviously. It is not that we don't need engineers. We need engineers. It'll be good to have a master's because masters folks tend to have a little bit more depth in the area because they would have focused a little bit. You would have taken some focus courses in this area, for example, right? But we also have undergrads, people, engineers who graduated with an undergrad, and these days that is not a bar at all. I mean, kids who are very motivated are capable, and they're able to get in and hit the ground running. So the point being that one of the things that we do, for example, in the company is developing solutions to problems that are posed by somebody in the government or somebody in the industry, right? So to be able to do that, you need to either have a long experience, like 20, 30 years, or at least have a PhD where you would have looked at some related problem spaces, right? It doesn't have to be the exact one because it's very hard to find the exact mix, but something relevant, something related, so that it is more of the journey from a PhD perspective, right? Where if you guys want a little bit of a primer on that, the point is in the course of your PhD, right? You are let's start with undergrad. In undergrad, it's all about breadth. You're looking at like vast spaces, right? You're taking courses in multiple areas. In masters, you kind of hone in a little bit, and you start looking at a little more depth than breadth, right? You find one particular area that you're interested in, and you start working in that area. And within PhD, you go even deeper. You're actually tasked to actually develop a problem space within that area. Up until masters, you're working on problems that have been created by somebody else. I mean, more so in the undergrad, right? You have textbooks, you have some material. The professor is very knowledgeable. He's creating the problems for you, and you're working on finding solutions for that. But in the PhD, you're actually tasked with developing or working on something that has not been done before. So you are in the driver's seat. You are creating a new problem space. So that journey actually helps you a lot when you get out and join a company like ours, where now you're tasked with finding not only finding solutions to new problems, but sometimes even helping the program managers devise a new area entirely. So that is the kind of things that we look at. So we need PhDs for that kind of a landscape, but then PhDs cannot do all the work all the time, right? In the sense they are working at a higher level. So when they distill things out, delineate things out, we need somebody to actually come in and once the algorithms are developed, somebody to implement them on a software-defined radio or on a simulated environment or a test bed, things like that. That is where engineers come in. And we have some terrific engineers that are doing an excellent job of taking what the higher ups are giving them and then converting that into tools, into applications that we can then demonstrate and that get integrated into the customer's landscape. So that is kind of what we look for in terms of and so from that perspective, especially if you're in the communications networking landscape, uh, sometimes what we see is if you're a CS major, right? Uh, they are mostly interested in the software side of things, coding, complexity theory, things like that. That also depends whether you're on the theoretical side of CS or on the more implementation side of CS. One of the things that we work on a lot is things like radars, electronic warfare, things like that. So there is a little bit of a special skill set that you would need, communication slash networking skill set that we are mostly looking for. But it is not a be all and end all. I mean, we can train youngsters into learning those things. I know a lot of physicists who moved into the communications area and they have done wonders, excellent job. So in that sense, there is no limitation to any of this, but some kind of earlier training would always be good.
Yeah, and so you talked about like your criteria for hiring and also like what people lack, but like we want to talk like where do you see tech hiring, especially in like communications, and that like moving in like the next 5 to 10 years, especially with like AI.
Yeah, so AI is an interesting tool in some sense, right? So AI is a disruptor, no doubt, but it is not the first time that you had a disruptor like this come into existence, right? If you think about in the past, I mean, somebody can philosophically go all the way back to the invention of fire or wheel or something like that. They would have been disruptors at that time, right? But in the modern world, think electricity, think railroads, right? They were all disruptors of their time, and every time there is a disruptor, there is going to be some change in the landscape, right? Like people who were doing a lot of whaling, think going onto the seas and killing whales for the blubber, for the oil to burn in the homes. Once electricity came into existence, their jobs went away in a way, right? So you can historically make a lot of these kind of connections over time. Uh, in fact, if you recall, the word computer was actually a job description before calculators were invented. NASA needed people who could sit there and do computations for the scientists out there, and that was how the word computer came into existence. You may be familiar with that. Once calculators came into the picture, that kind of went away, right? I mean, when I was a kid, I had to learn log tables because we were not allowed to use calculators until we got into but these days nobody uses log tables for anything, right? So these kind of things happen all the time. So for every time that kind of thing happens, there are two sides to the coin, right? If you think about it, there are people who are building those things, right? And there are people who are using those things for their activity, right? Over time, obviously, the technology has the innovation within technology has sped up, no doubt about that. Like between if you think electricity to industrial revolution, might have taken like 100 years, but or not maybe not 100 years, but my point being that innovation, early on innovation, these key milestones, the distance between those in terms of time was much larger. These days things are happening at a much faster pace, no doubt about it, but it also becomes an opportunity. So this is the two sides of the coin. So you are at that cusp of deciding what you want to do, right? Whether you want to be on the side of building AI systems or AI tools and applying them. Think of AI as a hammer in some sense, right? And you want, if you're at the side of building the hammer, that is half of one side of the coin. The other is using that hammer to drive down nails. What nails you want to use the hammer on, right? So those are the two sides of the coin. So you want to be either on building AI systems or using AI effectively to amplify your career growth and things like that. So which side you want to be in is something that you have to decide. But definitely in the next 5 to 10 years, gone are the days where you say, if you say I'm a student in computer science with a 2.5 GPA and I want to just, find a job coding somewhere. You won't be able to find it because those jobs will be gone. No question about it. So the question that you have to answer yourself is which side of that AI divide you want to be. Do you want to be building AI tools? Do you want to be using those tools? Ideal answer is both. Whoever is building the tools will get to use them as well, right? But those who are just using them may not be able to understand the intricacies of things, of how AI tools are built. So, some of the things I feel it is still. This is what I would convey to every student out there: fundamentals. Learn math. Learn systems. Learn first principles. That is always going to keep you in the loop, keep you, help you with innovating. Otherwise, you are at the mercy of some trends. You don't want to be just following trends because these days, especially, those trends are changing at a very rapid pace. So you may find yourself completely in an unknown territory. Like imagine 20 years ago, if somebody is entering into the market, I was entering into the market, I could have survived, had knowing a couple of languages like C, C++ or Java. You make a career out of it. Uh, I know a lot of people who, have done that and they have been happy, going through that because there hasn't been a major disruptor like AI during that time that was impacting their way of work. But now Claude can write code within seconds that people are taking a week to write, right? And so you cannot compete with that. So a lot of companies are definitely going to look at their bottom line and say, I had 20 people before, now I can get the job done with 2 people. So those are the kind of things you have to worry about. And another very important point that I want to convey to all the students out there is if you look at history, right? Um, folks may have been very siloed. Like even then, actually, it was interesting. Now that you think about it, Isaac Newton or Leibniz or all these people, they had a lot of problems that they were looking at. It was not just math or physics or something. At that time, there probably wasn't even any demarcation like that, right? But over time, in the recent past at least, things have gotten a little bit more siloed. Like if you're a math major, you look at math problems. You're physics, but these days, all the low hanging fruit are gone. So now it is interdisciplinary work. It is very important for everybody to understand what is, even if you have a primary area of interest, you want to be able to understand the developments that are happening in all the adjacent areas and bring them into your landscape. Without that, you're going to lose out, because AI tools, because of the ubiquity of the knowledge, right, and the way they are making these connections, if you don't understand the trend, you'll be losing out. So interdisciplinary research areas, interdisciplinary thinking is very important. And another point I wanted to make quickly for all the youngsters out there is, you want to learn to communicate your ideas in a very quick, effective way, because people's what you call attention spans have been decimated. So unless you grab their attention in the first whatever few microseconds, right, you're going to lose them out. So trying to figure out a way to explain things in a very succinct, quick, and articulate manner is going to be very helpful. And you'll see people who have those skills succeed more than those who don't have that skill.
Yeah, it's funny because usually we ask everybody who's on here about message for those who are just kind of early in their career or maybe undergrad. But you've really thoroughly answered that for us in like kind of a three-part way. Um, I think a lot of the things you mentioned point to like a main idea of problem solving and having a problem solving mindset. And no matter what tools or what hammers that may come in the future, we're still going to need people who can find new problem spaces and then start working on solving those problems, putting a dent in those new areas. But I think me and Ashad learned a lot from this conversation. Ashad, if you have any final points, you can definitely throw those in.
I mean, just like reiterating what Abdullah said, great advice. I think
Thank you.
you answered the question thoroughly, and I think it's just a new perspective that we've gained today, especially from someone in communications. As I said before, we haven't had someone that worked in like wireless communications. It's very interesting to get your take on what tech is going to be like, and like how AI is going to impact people and companies in your sector. And
Yeah, yes, but he was also the first person on here with a PhD, and I think you gave me a new perspective on like what a PhD actually means. And that's I really like the explanation of like of making those problems and looking at new problems, completely new problems, uncharted territory.
That is
And
exactly right, and that is where people get lost sometimes, and that
Mhm.
is where you're choosing the right advisor becomes important, because it is the advisor who brings you back into reality sometimes when you get lost. And so, if you are at that point, choosing the right advisor is always critical. And a PhD, to me, just the point that I made earlier about you asked that question about why did I go to, for my PhD after I was working. The last couple of years of my work after my masters, right? The last couple of years was very monotonous, very mundane, and I was not very happy, to be honest. This might be news to some of my colleagues at that time who may ever listen to me here, but it was a little difficult during that time because it was very monotonous. Then I complete my PhD, go to NRL. 16 years went by like a blink of an eye, because every day you're looking at new problems, you're looking at new solutions. Sometimes it is a problem that is interesting. Most of the time solutions are interesting, but sometimes it is the problem that is interesting, because if you we actually if you want to look up this area of age of information, this is an area that I have pretty good amount of fingerprints on. I've actually published a good amount of papers in this area. It was originated by a professor out of Rutgers, but we saw the importance of this area of age of information to tactical communications and networking, and we opened that problem space up to the point where now it has become a very prominent field that is being studied by academics and industry folks for the last 10 years. So those are the kind of opportunities you'll get. It is. PhD is not a magic wand, obviously. I mean, it's not saying that once you have it, you'll do these things. But my point is the journey, as I mentioned, right? The journey from undergrad to the end of PhD. That is what you'll take away with you. You'll learn from that, and you will learn to apply that to new areas because you've already gone through the crucible once. So this kind of thing comes a little naturally to you. So that I feel is what PhD offers you. So if you are amenable to that, if you're thinking along those lines, definitely consider doing a PhD because it'll open up your horizons.
But yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming over here and talking about your experiences, the different problems that maybe your company tackles that you've tackled in your career, and how kind of like you've progressed, and some advice, obviously, for people who are early in their career.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a lot of fun. This is the first time I ever did anything like this, so I'll remember this.
All
You
right.
did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yep.